Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to another episode, a live broadcast of A Coffee with Chris. And this week, you've got two guests for the price of one. Delighted to say that we are joined by the two J's, James and Jamie from the Inbox Club. Put simply, these guys help you earn more from your emails. As always, this broadcast is brought to you in association with our charity partner, local cancer charity 𝗖𝗵𝗄𝗵, who help people locally affected by cancer. James, let's kick off with you, my friend, okay? Because I think we might have a fight here. Email marketing is back on the rise, and people are really starting to understand the value of it. Do you think part of the reason for that is that social media has become too noisy somewhat?
Hi, Chris. Yeah, lovely to be here. Thanks very much for inviting us on. So I was in the shower this morning and I thought of an analogy that I wanted to share to answer this question. You're a Norwich boy, Chris, so you'll know we have some great buskers in the city centre. For me, social media is busking on the streets. You are amplifying your what you have to say to a large number of people who may or may not be interested in hearing that message. And that is social media. Sometimes, if you're excellent and your message is on point, you can amass quite a big crowd, and that's when social media really works. Other times, people walk past and nobody cares. And often that has nothing to do with how good or bad your message might be. Email, meanwhile, is what happens after you've bought the CD of the busker. So you're being invited back to the home of whoever it is who's interested in you, and you're given the privilege then of having some one-on-one time with them. And so that's the metaphor that I'm trying to draw here. So to answer your question directly, do I think that social media is too loud? I think it certainly can be, but it absolutely has its use. And I think you should be using both in tangent. One should be for that initial amplification, and then the other should be for that more intimate one-to-one communication. And I think that's where email really shines.
Brilliant, James. I didn't expect to hear about you in the shower straight away, but I loved that analogy. Yeah. Jamie, I think James has teed you up quite nicely there, because I wanted to ask about the relationship between social and email, and for your opinion on this. How can me, my guys, my world of social, how can we support your world of email, and perhaps vice versa as well? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think the vice versa part there is particularly poignant, because what we want to do is we want to start harnessing our social media audience and turn them into a community and a list of our own, right? So when we're broadcasting on social media, which is an excellent thing to do, by the way, I'm not saying that just because you're a social media consultant, Chris, but you're effectively borrowing the audience, right, from Instagram, from LinkedIn, or whatever the platform is. When you start a newsletter and start building your own audience, you own that data. So there's a bit more security and control over the people you're broadcasting to. So what we want to do is, if we have a good social media following, is to try to turn that into an audience that is just for you, right? And they're advocates and fans of your work and what you do. So, but if we've got a good newsletter audience, we want to then promote our socials as well, right? And something that James does on the side as a side business is he runs a newsletter for fantasy football, right? And he uses his newsletter to get followers on Twitter, and then he uses his Twitter followers to build subscribers to the newsletter, right? So they should work in tandem, because audiences have different values, but so do both.
I love that, and I would add on to that there's almost a risk element to this, to mitigate risk, because with these social platforms, obviously they do span over a number of years, and often the large ones last and the fads don't, right? But at the same time, the art of having a successful email newsletter campaign, if you've got a pre-existing database, being able to shift audiences from one social to the other almost stops you losing that attention, right? So James, is that something that you would perhaps recommend to help build different social platforms, given your experience, obviously, with your FPL newsletter?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the more you can be on, the better. You know, what we really want to do is I suppose Musk-proof our audience, such that no matter what crazy thing might happen to any individual platform, and it might be something crazy like the world's richest man buys your social media platform and thus your audience with it. It might be something less crazy that happens far more frequently, which is, for example, an algorithm change. You know, how many YouTubers have we seen over the years suddenly drop off the face of the earth? It's not because they've stopped producing content. It's because something in the algorithm, completely imperceptible to most people, has changed the way that their content is amplified. And as Jamie says, the email list is immune to that. You know, we've seen loads of changes. We've seen social platforms come and go over the years. You know, how many changes have we seen to your inbox? It's basically remained the same. All right, they might introduce a few AI generated folders or some organizational tools, but more or less, emails look the same as they did back in the early days of the internet. So yeah, of course, the more we're able to transpose our audience across those different platforms, the less risk we have, the less investment we have in one particular platform, and that can only be a good thing.
That's awesome, James. Jamie, what are the nuts and bolts of actually doing that, right? I really want these broadcasts to, you know, help people and give them as much value as possible. Is it a simple case of adding a call to action at the top, the bottom, in terms of saying, like, go and follow us on X, or go and subscribe to us on YouTube? Or is it as simple as that? Or would you maybe entice them? Is there a clever way of doing that? Where in the email is best? Please share your wisdom with us on that.
Look, I'll try and share what wisdom I have, for sure. When we get to asking anyone to take action, we have to think about what is in it for them, right? So if we want someone to go from a newsletter subscriber to a Twitter follower, there needs to be a reason in it for them, right? Because otherwise they just won't do it. So if we go back to the FPL example of the newsletter he runs, that James runs, they might release team news prematurely on Twitter before they have a chance to get it out to the newsletter audience. So what they get from it there is that they're able to get the information quicker. So that's a reason for them to become a Twitter follower. So what we want to focus on is, if we want someone to take an action, i.e. subscribe to the newsletter, give them a real compelling reason why they should do that, and then vice versa for social media.
Here, I couldn't agree more with that. I think particularly from social back to newsletter, people seem to be a little bit more protective of obviously their data and giving their email out now. It used to be something that you just did all the time, and now that you're like, you know, when you're in a coffee shop or something, you're like, oh, I'm not sure if I want to subscribe to your spam. Thank you very much. I do think that if you are pushing from social to build your newsletter, which I'd highly recommend, because it's a fantastic way of forming attention, especially if you work with a business like the Inbox Club. And I think there you go, boys.
There we go. Cheers, mate.
And I do think it's important to incentivize that, right? So that could be something as simple as maybe a discount on a product or service. It could be a bottle of champagne. It could be something small and simple. But I definitely think that's a very good point. If you're asking people to take action, make it about them and give them something for doing so.
Yeah.
James, going to you on your email bugbears, your headaches, the things that make you cry when you see an email come into your inbox and you go, oh my goodness gracious me, why have they done that? Please let us know, what are the big, maybe 3 mistakes that businesses are making when it comes to their email marketing?
Oh, where do I start? I think we could probably do a top 10, couldn't we? Quite comfortably. I'll try to keep these as, I suppose, actionable as possible for your viewers. Starting first and foremost with subject lines. People do have a tendency to overthink their subject lines. What I would say is that variety is the spice of life when it comes to a good subject line. It's not necessarily about making sure that it's absolutely perfect. We know people who will spend longer on the subject line than they will the actual email itself, and we should be careful not to fall into that trap. But introduce some variety. One week use emojis, the next week don't use emojis. You know, one week have quite a long subject line, the next week only have one word, and that will keep your open rates healthy. testing is another element, by the way, that should be used. Always test your subject lines, and that's really, really important. Find out what your audience likes, because as we know, every audience is different. So that's number one. Secondly, I would say over designing your emails. One of the key priorities, I think, of a lot of people that are new to email is, how sexy does my email look? And sexiness should not be the key measure of success for an email here. What we want to do is focus more on, how can my design enable my message to get through as clearly and as succinctly as possible? So what we're thinking about here is skimmability. You know, we know that people don't have loads of time to read your emails. So how can we design our emails such that people are focusing on the content itself and the words, not necessarily just how beautiful it looks? And so over elaborate, if you're worried about this, just start off with a plain email. I promise you it will perform absolutely fine. And, you know, when we think about the emails we read, they tend to be plain, don't they? Like the emails that your mates send one another aren't like these super sexy, overly designed, beautiful templates. They're plain. So don't worry too much about design. Third thing I would say is only being sales focused in your emails. One of the things that we're really big on here at the Inbox Club is value focused content. We want to be sending value to people's inboxes, because as Jamie said, we've already promised a compelling reason to sign up to our newsletter, whatever newsletter that might be, whether it's ours or a client that we're working on. We want to treat the fact that somebody subscribed to our emails with respect. And as you say, Chris, people are more and more cynical about giving away that data. So if we've won that battle, let's thank them for subscribing by giving them properly good, valuable content. Let's not just go for the sale and try and rinse them dry.
That's brilliant. There's so much there. I've got a couple of points on that I've picked up that I want to throw at you boys, actually. Maybe around the testing element. And Jamie, I'll maybe come to you on this. I was recently watching a piece of content, and I've forgotten his name, which is awfully embarrassing, but it was actually done with someone interviewing the someone at Stephen Bartlett's crew, talking about the Diary of the CEO podcast and the amount of testing that goes into it. And I don't know whether this is true or not, but I have a funny feeling that businesses don't test at all. And if they do, it's done in a really poor manner. And I guess this is why it's important to consider simply outsourcing your email and getting actual proper support with your email so you can properly test, because the benefits of testing, Jamie, that they must be huge for a business.
Yeah, for sure. And you're absolutely right. Most businesses aren't doing it, and should be doing it to some level. So when you bring on an email marketing specialist, whether it's a freelancer or an agency, you know, A/B testing, a robust A/B testing strategy is something that you should expect from that service. So whenever we bring on a new client, we don't pretend to know exactly what that audience likes or what it resonates with them or how to get them to engage. We don't pretend to know everything, but that's what testing is for. So, you know, in terms of, like James said, emojis in subject lines. So let's test that, see how each one of those performs. And, you know, image versus copy ratio in the email, and send what day to send and what time, you know. So all of these things can be tested, and usually it can be done really easily with the platforms that you've got as well. They make it really intuitive to set up these A/B tests. Yeah, so there's tons you can do, and the more you do, it's basically getting your audience to tell you stuff without having to ask them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does actually.
Yeah.
And the more that you talk to me, boys, the more I'm thinking about the perhaps similarities in skill set that, you know, are transferable from certainly organic social to email. You've mentioned subject titles, right? Subject lines. Now, I'm really interested in this because something that I'm really passionate about is educating people on the power of focusing on attention. And without grabbing attention, you don't even get the opportunity to ask for engagement, to give them all of that value that your business can help people with. What subject lines? Talk to me about those. I think people are so scared of, you know, being clickbaity or coming across as that, right? But at the same time, James, without grabbing that, people are falling over. So I guess that's why people are spending so long on their subject lines, right?
Yeah, I guess I do. Like I said, I think there is probably a tendency to overestimate subject lines when it comes to the criteria that a recipient will use to determine whether they're going to open an email. Subject lines are actually second behind the sender name, and there's lots that we can do with the sender name. Similar kind of things we can have, for example, rather than just a brand name, we can have the name of someone who works for that brand as the sender name, and that frame breaking change can make a big difference in the inbox. I would say when it comes to clickbait, what we have to think about here is cultivating long-term goodwill when it comes to the emails that we're sending. If we quickly gain a reputation for clickbait, what will happen is that in the short term, yes, we'll probably get incredible engagement on that clickbaity email, but is the email after that going to get incredible engagement? Probably not, because what we've done is just alienated a group of people that open that, were expecting something, and perhaps were disappointed. So I would say with your subject line, it's important to be specific about what's going to be included. Certainly don't lie when it comes to what you're going to be including. And just remember that in order to be compelling, you don't need to kind of bend the truth or kind of turn into some sort of, I won't name any specific papers, but turn into some sort of like seedy journalist and start thinking about opens. Instead, you just need to deliver on whatever promise you're making in your subject line. And that doesn't need to be particularly sensational for people to click.
That's gold. I think people struggle to understand the difference between clickbait and attention, right? Because that's a really important balance to strike. And James, just quickly coming back to you before I hit Jamie with the meaty question after this. Just from a social media perspective, one of the things that people play around with a lot are our GIFs, our creative videos, our images. This is maybe a bit of a selfish question, but I'm asking for myself, like, is that something that we should fill our emails up with, or does that negatively impact performance? Again, just on that point of what can we learn from social media? If people are afraid with social media, can we pull in some of those creative elements to an email, or would you recommend keeping it perhaps 80–90% text-based? Like, what's good? What works with you guys?
Yeah, I think the ratios really vary. And again, this is not to harp on about it too much, but this is where testing would come in, because we can answer those questions with testing. You know, a fantasy football audience, for example, where I'm sending analysis about the upcoming game week. Let me know if you need any tips, by the way, Chris. That is going to be mostly text-based, with maybe supplemented with a few diagrams and screen grabs from tweets and whatnot. However, if we're selling a product that's incredibly visual, we might want to focus more on the images, the GIFs, the GIFs or GIFs, I'm not sure. That's a separate podcast. But we might want to focus more on that kind of multimedia stuff if we know that we have something incredibly visual and something that ultimately will sell itself with an image of it alone. So we are copywriters at heart, but part of that package means acknowledging when image is best and when it's better to use words. And so we would test those sorts of things, and we would try to answer those questions on an audience by audience basis. All I would say is that there is probably a limit when it comes to how much of that you can include in an email. And you know, it won't shock you to hear that if you're including too many images or too many GIFs, etc., the danger of it becoming big and therefore impacting on deliverability, that's how likely it is to find a spam folder, it increases. So we want to make sure that, yes, we include that stuff, and the ratio will depend, but that we're all also mindful of how deliverability might be impacted.
So much gold in there. Thank you so much for answering my very selfish question. And it's definitely GIFs, by the way. I'm not having anyone coming on here saying GIFs.
Yeah, I'm team GIFs.
I'll give you a yellow card on that one. Jamie, strap yourself in, my friend, because okay. I want to ask you about perhaps a recurring themed question on Coffee with Chris. And that's around LinkedIn private messaging. Firstly, just because it does my head in when someone sends me a really cold one, which we covered in our last Coffee with Chris with Matt Sykes. Go and listen and check that out if you've not already, for the people watching live and listening back. But I wanted to ask you, like, what's your take on perhaps email marketing versus LinkedIn private messaging? Because perhaps some people might say, well, I don't need to do email. I'll just send them a LinkedIn private message, and perhaps vice versa. I don't need to do LinkedIn private message. So what's your opinion? What order should people be doing in it? What's your take on it?
Yeah, I'm glad I strapped myself in for your meaty question, Chris. Yeah, so it's interesting. I think from experience, it's really hard to reach people in LinkedIn DMs. And I'm not just talking about people, cold prospects here. I'm talking about people that know you. It's so often that I send LinkedIn DMs to people who I know really well, and even perhaps expecting my message, but miss it because there's so much noise there. So, I'm not saying that there's no noise in the inbox, because there definitely is, but that's something I've experienced. My take on it in general is that you should probably do both, and that there are things you can leverage in both areas that can serve different purposes. For instance, LinkedIn DMs, you can send voice notes and like short Loom videos, and that they would land much better than if you sent a voice note and an email, for example. I don't even remember ever getting a voice note by email. So there's ways in which you can leverage both channels, but whichever one you're using, I would think about how you can be different, think about how you can be creative and frame breaking. And ultimately, you're using those channels to communicate and talk with people. So make sure you're doing that. Be conversational, be authentic, and talk to people in those channels.
I think that's just so good. I think that they don't have to be siloed, right? And actually, maybe be selfish about it. Push people where you want them to go, right? And if it's email and you prefer LinkedIn and you're on that more, then send them over there from email, or vice versa. I think that's totally okay. And hopefully, perhaps people watching or listening to this back now on Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, wherever, are reflecting on this and thinking, oh yeah, do you know what? I need to turn on email more, and actually we need to treat them as one. There needs to be one strategy that perhaps encompasses everything, and they can really complement each other. So Jamie and James, the two J's, I just wanted to say, we could go on forever about email marketing and social, but I just wanted to say thank you for your time today. I really, really appreciate it.
No, it's good. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Cheers, Chris.
And where can people find you, James? Where can people tune into the Inbox Club? And go on, say email, please.
We've never actually sent an email. No, we do have a newsletter, but I would say probably the website is the best port of call, isn't it?
Yeah, and then you can get us anywhere from there.
Yeah.
If you chat to us in the future, we aren't actually joined at the hip. I know it looks like we're joined at the hip, but we're not. We're just good mates, and we happen to want to do this podcast with Chris together. So you might just get one of us next time.
Yeah, absolutely. The website, by the way, is theinbox.club.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time and wisdom and insights today, boys. I really appreciate it. As always, if you've enjoyed this episode of A Coffee with Chris, do let us know your thoughts, feelings, and feedback. Drop us a comment, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on any of the social platforms. And as always, a very special shout out to our charity partner, 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗶𝘀, who help local people affected by cancer. That's all for now. We shall see you next